From where I come from, someone like her wouldn't even be allowed to touch my glass. That's what he tells her. With a sharp crack, Liang slapped her across the face. The sound echoed like gunfire in the restaurant. Glasses rattled, forks clattered. A hush swept through every table. Customers froze, stunned by what they had just witnessed. But Amara didn't freeze. Her body reacted faster than her thoughts. She grabbed his wrist, turned her hip, and in one clean motion she had practiced years ago in a local judo class, she flipped him off his feet. His $600 shoes pointed at the ceiling before his body crashed against the floor with a heavy thud. Gasps and screams filled the air. Cell phones lit up like fireflies, cameras pointed directly at Amara and the billionaire lying stunned on the ground. Liang's face twisted with rage as he scrambled to rise. "You are finished," he hissed. "I will ruin you." Amara's chest heaved, her palms shaking, but she stood tall over him, her eyes burning with a fire she could no longer contain. The room seemed to hold its breath. And then, faint but unmistakable, came the wail of police sirens pulling up outside the restaurant. Amara Johnson was 25 years old, a young black woman with big dreams and a spirit hardened by life's unfair turns. She had grown up in a small American town, raised mostly by her grandmother after her father left when she was 6 and her mother drowned in debt and exhaustion from working 2 jobs. Amara was the type of woman people either ignored or underestimated. That was their mistake. It was a Friday night at Pine Hill Steakhouse, the kind of place where the smell of buttered rolls met the chatter of tired workers, families, and the occasional big spender. Amara worked there part-time while also attending community college. She wore her red apron tight around her waist, her braids pulled neatly back. To most customers, she was just another server moving through the noise. That night, the noise fell into a strange silence. A man in an expensive gray suit with a diamond watch was seated at the center table, surrounded by businessmen who treated him like a king. His name was Liang Wei, a Chinese billionaire CEO who had built an empire on shipping and technology. He was in America to make deals, but here in this restaurant, he was a man who believed money made him untouchable. Amara placed the glasses of wine on his table with her usual polite smile. But instead of thanking her, Liang sneered, whispering something cruel to his men in Mandarin before leaning back and looking her up and down. His voice carried enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Where I come from, someone like her wouldn't even be allowed to touch my glass." A chill crawled down Amara's back. She tried to walk away, but then it happened. Before the sirens, before the shock, before the slap, Amara's life had been quiet. She grew up in Meadowbrook, a little town where neighbors waved at each other but whispered behind curtains. Her grandmother, Lorraine, raised her with firm love after her father disappeared into another state and another family. Lorraine was the one who packed her lunches, taught her scripture on Sundays, and reminded her that no matter how much the world tried to shrink her, she must stand tall. Amara learned early how small-town racism worked. It didn't always come in loud insults. Sometimes it was in the way shopkeepers followed her through aisles, or how her teachers assumed her essays were plagiarized if they sounded too good. She got used to it. She swallowed it because what choice did she have? At 17, she wanted to be a teacher. By 20, she wanted to own her own cafe. But between paying rent, helping her grandmother with medical bills, and working late shifts, dreams often felt like decorations on a shelf. Nice to look at, but too far to touch. Still, Amara had her brother, Deshaun. 2 years older, he was the one who walked her home after late shifts, the one who told her, "Don't let nobody step on you, sis. You're stronger than you think." He believed in her when she didn't believe in herself. Yet strength has limits. At her previous job in a diner, she once reported a customer who called her a slur. The manager didn't defend her. Instead, he pulled her aside, saying, "We can't lose paying customers. Maybe you should learn to let it slide." A week later, she was let go without explanation. That memory still burned inside her. She had walked home that night with tears in her eyes, telling Deshawn she was done fighting battles she could never win. "I'll just keep my head down from now on," she had whispered. But some people don't get the choice to keep their head down forever. Life eventually pushes you. At Pine Hill Steakhouse, when a manager told her to cover Liang Wei's table despite her unease, Amara remembered all those lessons. Stay quiet, smile, let it pass. Her hands shook as she balanced the tray. Her stomach knotted, her spirit stretched thin. She wanted peace, but fate was sharpening its blade. And as the sound of police sirens grew louder outside, Amara realized peace had already been stolen from her once again. Amara's story wasn't just about one slap. It was about the weight of 1,000 smaller cuts that had shaped her before this night. There had been the time in high school when a classmate called her ghetto after she got the lead role in the school play. Or the time a landlord showed her a filthy apartment and told her with a smirk, "It's probably what you're used to." Each moment had carved lines into her memory. She never threw a punch, never raised her voice. She let it go, like her grandmother taught her. "The Lord sees it all," Lorraine used to say. But even Lorraine's voice couldn't heal every wound. Deshawn often played the opposite. "Don't be quiet, Amara. People need to know you're not weak." He had a temper, one that scared her sometimes. He was the kind of man who clenched his fists when the world disrespected his sister, and that fire had landed him in trouble more than once. Still, he was her shield. When Amara's hands trembled from anxiety, Deshawn was the one who steadied them. When she doubted herself, he reminded her that she came from a bloodline of survivors. "We're built different," he'd say, tapping her chest. "It's in your heart." But that strength was tested at Pine Hill long before the billionaire walked in. One evening, a wealthy customer had made lewd comments as she bent to clear plates. "Bet you'd look better out of that uniform," he whispered. Amara had smiled politely and walked away. The man left no tip, only a smirk that followed her into the kitchen. That night, she stared at herself in the mirror, wondering how much of herself she had already given away just to survive. The manager's voice replayed in her head. Customers are always right. But in her gut, she knew that wasn't true. It was just last week when Liang Wei had entered Pine Hill for the first time. He sat at the largest table, men in suits hanging on his every word. Amara noticed how the waitstaff moved nervously around him, careful not to spill a drop or make the smallest mistake. He demanded respect, but it smelled more like fear. Deshawn had warned her once about men like him. Money don't make a man good. Sometimes it makes him rotten. Amara brushed it off then, not realizing how quickly his words would prove true. And now, as she stood frozen in the restaurant with her chest still stinging from the slap, she knew this wasn't just another ugly moment she could walk away from. The sirens outside weren't coming for Liang. They were coming for her. Liang Wei was not the type of man who apologized. He was the type who believed apologies were for those beneath him. Born into privilege, he inherited his father's business in Shanghai and expanded it into a global empire. Shipping, tech, real estate, he touched it all. In America, he walked like a king, carrying not only his wealth but the arrogance that came with it. People bowed to his money. Bankers treated him like a god. Politicians rushed to shake his hand, and even business rivals never dared cross him. He was used to controlling every room he walked into. And tonight, he wanted to control Amara. When she served his table, Liang leaned back in his chair, watching her with a mixture of contempt and curiosity. To him, she was not a person, only a symbol, someone to belittle, someone to remind of her place. He spat out his words, loud enough for the other diners to hear, knowing humiliation was part of his performance. Amara tried to remain calm. She thought of her grandmother's steady hands, her brother's protective fire. She told herself to just deliver the wine, walk away, and let the night pass. But Liang was a man who fed off reactions, and silence only made him push harder. He leaned close as she set down a glass. "Do you know who I am?" he sneered. His accent was sharp, his tone colder than ice. Men like me build empires. Women like you serve tables. The words burned in her chest. She didn't respond. She only stepped back, praying the moment would end. But her manager noticed. He stormed over, his face red, whispering urgently into Amara's ear. Do not mess this up. That man's money could change this place. Do whatever he asks. Her jaw tightened, her heart sinking. Her boss wasn't protecting her. He was protecting profits. And so, she turned back toward Liang's table, tray balanced in trembling hands. Every step felt like walking into a storm she couldn't escape. And then, without warning, his hand rose. The slap came swift and cruel, cutting through the restaurant like thunder. The sting burned across her cheek, but what cut deeper was the silence that followed. Every eye in the restaurant locked on Amara. Some people gasped. Others simply stared, frozen, unsure if they should interfere. Her manager's face turned pale, but he said nothing. No one said anything. Amara felt the humiliation crawl over her skin. Memories of every other insult she had swallowed came rushing back. Every time she had stayed quiet to keep the peace. For 1 second, she almost did it again. She almost walked away. But her grandmother's voice rose in her memory. Dignity is worth more than gold. And then Deshawn's, don't let nobody step on you. The fire inside her finally snapped. She dropped the tray, seized Liang's wrist, and with a burst of strength and precision, she flipped him across her hip. He hit the ground so hard the table rattled. Dishes shattered, wine splashed across the floor. Gasps turned into screams, cell phones lifted higher. Liang's pride shattered with him. He scrambled to his knees, spitting curses, his expensive watch flashing in the light. You dare touch me? He shouted, his voice cracking with rage. Do you know who I am? Amara stood tall, her chest rising and falling like she had just fought for her very soul. For the first time in years, she felt unbroken. But her victory lasted only seconds. Outside, the flashing red and blue lights painted the windows. Sirens wailed louder, and heavy boots pounded against the pavement. The front doors of the restaurant burst open, and uniformed officers rushed in, hands on their weapons. And their eyes turned, not to Liang lying on the floor, but to Amara. The whole restaurant froze when the officers stormed in, guns drawn. It should have been Liang they targeted. He was the one who slapped her, the one who caused the chaos. But their eyes locked on Amara. To them, she wasn't a woman defending herself. She was a threat. Hands where we can see them, one officer barked, voice sharp enough to cut glass. Amara raised her shaking hands, her chest still burning with the sting of his slap. The diners whispered, phones still recording, catching every second. Liang pulled himself up with help from his men, clutching his pride more than his bruises. She attacked me, he shouted, pointing like a king commanding soldiers. She's dangerous. Some customers shouted back in protest. That's not true, one woman cried. We saw what happened. Others kept silent, afraid of getting involved. The officers closed in. Amara's manager didn't speak up. He shrank against the wall, protecting his job instead of the truth. Amara's mind raced. Her grandmother's words about dignity clashed with the reality of cold handcuffs waiting for her wrists. She wanted to scream, but her voice felt trapped inside her chest. Liang's smirk returned as he dabbed at his lip with a silk handkerchief. You'll regret this, he hissed. His eyes promised more than revenge. They promised destruction. The metallic click of cuffs tightened around Amara's wrists. She had never felt so exposed, so helpless, and yet, deep down, a fire still flickered. This wasn't the end. But as she was led through the restaurant, cameras flashing like lightning, she wondered how many people would believe what they saw and how many would believe what Liang said. The last thing she heard before the doors slammed shut behind her was the sound of diners gasping, because her brother Deshawn had just burst through the door. Get your hands off my sister. Deshawn's voice thundered across the restaurant. He pushed through the crowd, fists clenched, his eyes blazing with fury. Amara froze as the officers tightened their grip on her arms. The tension in the room grew sharp, like a knife ready to cut. One officer shouted, "Stay back, sir." His hand hovered over his holster. But Deshawn didn't stop. His voice shook with rage. She didn't do anything wrong. That man hit her first. Liang smirked from behind his wall of businessmen, brushing dust from his suit. "You people," he sneered, "always making excuses for violence." His words dripped with venom, designed to sting. Amara shook her head at her brother, her eyes begging him not to make it worse. She knew how quickly a black man's anger could be turned against him in a place like this. "Please, Deshawn," she whispered, but the officers didn't hear her. They only saw his stance, his fists, his fire. "Back up!" the officer shouted again, now pointing directly at him. The room grew colder. Diners shifted nervously. Some still filmed. Others hid their phones, not wanting to be part of history. Finally, Deshawn raised his hand slowly, his chest heaving. His voice broke as he said, "She's all I've got. Don't do this to her." The cuffs clinked again as the officers pulled Amara toward the door. She kept her eyes locked on her brother, her heart splitting in two. As they shoved her into the back of the police car, Liang leaned close enough for only her to hear. His whisper was poison. "I'll destroy you in ways you can't even imagine." And Amara believed him. The first night in jail was the longest of Amara's life. The cell was cold, the mattress thin, the silence louder than any noise. She wrapped her arms around herself, replaying every second of the restaurant in her head. The slap, the throw, the sirens. It all felt unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. But when she closed her eyes, she saw her grandmother's face. Lorraine always told her, strength isn't about fighting. It's about surviving with your soul intact. Amara clung to that memory as if it were a blanket. Deshawn's voice echoed too. His promise. "I'll fight for you." She prayed he wouldn't do anything reckless, prayed he'd stay safe while she was trapped behind steel bars. Time crawled until the guards called her name. She was led to a small phone booth. The moment she picked up, she heard Deshawn's voice, thick with emotion. "We're going to get you out, Amara. I swear. I already called a lawyer." Her chest swelled with relief, but it cracked again when she heard what came next. "But you need to know, Liang's already talking to the press. He's telling the world you attacked him for no reason." Amara closed her eyes tight, her stomach twisting. "That's a lie," she whispered. "Yeah, but he's rich, and rich people get to decide what's true," Deshawn said bitterly. Later, in her cell, she heard other inmates whispering, "Hey, that's the girl from the news." She realized the story was already bigger than she was. And outside those walls, Liang was standing at a podium, cameras flashing, as he told the nation a story that painted Amara as violent trash. By morning, Amara's name was everywhere. On TV screens, anchors debated her fate. Online, her face was in thousands of posts. Some called her a hero, a woman who stood up against a powerful bully. Others called her dangerous, a waitress who had no right to touch a man like Liang Wei. The internet became a battlefield. Hashtags like hashtag Stand With Amara and hashtag Violent Waitress trended side by side. Strangers argued in comment sections like they knew her personally. Inside her cell, Amara sat in silence, hands folded, trying not to let the noise break her spirit. But she couldn't stop wondering, who believed her, who thought she was lying? Then a guard arrived with a message. Her lawyer wanted to see her. Amara walked into the meeting room, her chains rattling with each step. The lawyer was tall, expensive-looking, his smile slick. "Name's Richard. I can make this all go away," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But it's going to cost you. Everything you've got, and then some." Amara's heart sank. Even here, where she was most vulnerable, people wanted to use her. That evening, Deshawn returned to the phone line. "We can't trust him," he said firmly. "We'll find someone else." But before she could answer, Deshawn's voice cracked. "Amara, Liang's suing you. $50 million. Her stomach dropped. 50 million? That wasn't money. It was a death sentence. Amara's world kept crumbling. The very next day, her employer at Pine Hill Steakhouse released a statement. We do not tolerate violence. The waitress involved is no longer employed here. They had fired her, without hesitation, without even pretending to hear her side. Old friends stopped answering her calls. Neighbors who once smiled now looked away. Even people she thought would stand by her fell silent, afraid of being dragged into her storm. One night, she sat on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, tears rolling into her hair. She had done nothing wrong, and yet her whole life was being stripped away piece by piece. Deshawn visited again, his eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights. He held her hands through the glass. You gotta hold on, sis. Don't let them break you. She nodded, but her heart felt heavy. What if they already did? She whispered. But Deshawn didn't let go. No, you're stronger than this. You've always been stronger. Still, Amara couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Even her manager, the one who had forced her to serve Liang, had testified that she was unstable. He had chosen money over truth. And the worst blow came when Deshawn showed her court papers. Liang had bribed several witnesses from the restaurant. They were ready to lie under oath. Her whole world tilted. And as the guard led her back to her cell, Amara realized with icy certainty. Liang wasn't just trying to ruin her name. He was trying to bury her completely. The courtroom of public opinion hit Amara long before the real one did. Television screens flashed her picture alongside Liang's, headlines blaring words like assault and violence. On talk shows, commentators argued whether she was a symbol of courage or a dangerous hothead who didn't know her place. America had turned her pain into a debate. Inside jail, Amara sat with her head lowered, hands pressed together. She thought of Lorraine, her grandmother, and the way she'd whisper, "Keep your spirit steady when the storm rises." But even that wisdom felt thin when the whole country was split down the middle about who she was. At night, Amara heard the whispers of other inmates. "That's the waitress from the news," one said. Some looked at her with admiration. Others looked with doubt. It reminded her how fast strangers judged a person they'd never even spoken to. Then came hope. One afternoon, Amara was called to a visitor's booth. On the other side of the glass sat a woman she'd never seen before. She was tall, sharp-eyed, with streaks of gray in her dark hair. She introduced herself calmly. "My name is Evelyn Ross. I'm an attorney. I believe you deserve real defense. No money needed." Amara blinked. "Why would you help me?" Evelyn's voice carried weight, like someone who had carried battles on her shoulders before. "Because I've seen too many people like you crushed under money and power. I won't let that happen again." It was the first time in weeks Amara felt like someone believed her without hesitation. But just as her spirit lifted, the judge made his ruling, bail denied. The gavel slammed, and Amara realized she would face the storm from behind bars. The jail walls pressed closer each day, like they wanted to swallow her whole. Amara lay awake at night, thinking of the cafe she once dreamed of, soft jazz playing, her grandmother's recipes on the menu, a place where people could feel safe. Now that dream seemed laughable. Still, she tried to hold on to scraps of hope. She spent time listening to other women in the jail. One of them, a tough older inmate named Ruby, shared her story. Ruby had lost her kids, her freedom, her dignity, yet she still found a way to laugh. "You either break in here," Ruby told her, "or you bend and bounce back." Those words stayed with Amara. She realized survival wasn't just about staying alive. It was about refusing to let them take the last piece of who you were. But hope has sharp edges. One evening, during visiting hours, Amara saw Deshawn walk in with a limp. His face was bruised, his arm bandaged. He tried to smile, but the pain in his eyes betrayed him. Her heart dropped. "What happened to you?" He glanced at the guards, then leaned close to the glass. "They jumped me. Couple guys in ski masks. They didn't take money, didn't say a word. Just beat me down." Amara's stomach twisted with rage and guilt. She knew this wasn't random. Liang's reach stretched far beyond the courtroom, and as Deshawn's voice cracked with anger, she realized something chilling. Her brother might not survive this fight if Liang decided to keep pressing. Deshawn's beating spread like wildfire through Amara's veins. In the days that followed, she couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't shake the image of her brother lying in a hospital bed because of her battle with a man too rich to care about lives he destroyed. She wanted to scream, but in jail there was no place to let the scream out. Evelyn came to see her, dropping thick folders on the table. We're building your defense. Liang's story is full of holes. But you need to know something. He's bribing people. Staff members, even customers. They're lining up to say you attacked him unprovoked. Amara clenched her fists. They're lying, and they know it. Yes, Evelyn said. But money buys lies. That's the world we live in. Later that week, Amara was summoned again, this time by Liang's own lawyers. She sat across from them in a sterile room, their suits as polished as their smirks. One slid a paper across the table. Apologize. Say you lost your temper. Admit fault on live TV. Liang will drop the lawsuit. You'll walk out today. Her hands trembled as she stared at the document. Freedom sat right there, one signature away. But then she saw Deshawn's bruised face in her mind. She heard Lorraine's steady voice. She remembered every time silence had cost her dignity. Amara pushed the paper back. No deal. The lawyer sneered. Then you've chosen war. She didn't blink. No, I chose myself. Refusing the deal made Amara's fight even louder. News stations ran clips of her decision. Protesters began gathering outside the jail, holding signs that read "Stand with Amara" and "Justice over money." Across the country, her story became a symbol. Some saw her as strength, others as defiance. Inside, Evelyn worked tirelessly. She showed Amara new evidence. Files linking Liang to corruption in China, bribes, human rights abuses, and scandals buried under his wealth. He's not untouchable, Evelyn said. He's just been protected. Amara felt a surge of hope, but also fear. Men like Liang didn't just lose quietly. He had too much pride, too much power at stake. One night, guards escorted her back to her cell after a long day in court. As she lay down, the echoes of chants from protesters outside reached faintly through the windows. They were fighting for her, strangers she had never met. It gave her strength. The next morning, the news was everywhere. A leaked video showed Liang screaming at his employees, threatening them, even throwing a glass at one. His empire's shine began to crack. For the first time, the billionaire's perfect image looked human and ugly. But as Evelyn whispered during their next meeting, this is only the beginning. Liang won't go down without setting fire to everything around him. And Amara knew she was standing in the middle of the fire. The storm outside grew louder. Investigators dug deeper into Liang's past. Reporters unearthed stories of bribery, shady deals, mistreatment of workers. Each headline chipped away at his golden reputation. The public was turning. Amara, still trapped in jail, felt the shift like a new wind blowing through her cell. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself a smile. Maybe, just maybe, the truth had a chance. But hope was fragile. Court hearings grew more intense. Witnesses for Liang took the stand, parroting the same story about her being violent. Evelyn cross-examined them, poking holes, showing contradictions. Slowly, the lies began to crumble. Then came the moment Amara had both dreaded and prayed for. The judge ruled the case would go to a full trial. Cameras swarmed outside the courthouse. Crowds chanted her name. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a face on every screen. Deshawn hugged her in the visitor's room, his voice shaking. This is it, sis. This is where you win or lose everything. Amara nodded, her heart pounding. Then I'll win. As they locked eyes, the guard tapped his baton against the glass. Time was up, and in that moment, Amara realized her fight had only just begun. The courtroom felt like a battlefield. Cameras lined every wall. Reporters whispered into microphones, and strangers leaned in as if they had a right to Amara's story. She sat at the defense table, her hands shaking under the wood, staring at the man who had turned her life upside down. Liang sat tall, his suit gleaming, his smirk sharp as a blade. When the judge called the case to order, the silence carried weight. Every heartbeat echoed in Amara's ears. Evelyn stood beside her, shoulders squared, ready to fight. The prosecutor painted Amara as a violent woman, quick-tempered, dangerous. He showed replayed footage of the judo throw again and again, each time exaggerating her strength and Liang's innocence. But then Evelyn rose. Her voice cut through the air like glass. Ladies and gentlemen, this case isn't about violence. It's about dignity. It's about a man with power believing he could strike a woman without consequence. And it's about that woman standing her ground. The jury leaned in. The crowd buzzed. Amara could feel the tide shifting, but she also knew Liang had cards left to play. And sure enough, the next witness walked in. Someone Amara recognized. Someone who had once been her friend. Her stomach dropped. The betrayal was about to sting. Her former coworker, Tanya, took the stand. Amara remembered laughing with Tanya during late-night shifts, sharing secrets over burnt coffee. But now Tanya wouldn't meet her eyes. She spoke carefully, voice trembling just enough to look convincing. Yes, Amara always had a temper, Tanya said. She told me once she hated serving certain customers. I warned her it would get her in trouble. Gasps filled the courtroom. Amara's chest tightened. Each word cut deeper than the slap ever had. Evelyn stood and approached, her gaze steady. Miss Johnson, did Liang or his company reach out to you before this testimony? Tanya froze. She glanced at Liang, then back at the lawyer. I can't answer that. The room erupted. The judge banged his gavel, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. Amara stared at her old friend, her throat aching. Betrayal always hurt more than lies. Later, when the court recessed, Evelyn whispered, "Don't break. That's what they want. We'll turn this around." Amara nodded, but deep down, she knew something darker was at play. Liang wasn't just fighting in court. He was twisting every connection she ever had into a weapon. And in that moment, she realized the trial wasn't just about her throw. It was about survival. The defense hit back hard. Evelyn called witnesses Liang had silenced before, former employees from his company. One described being forced to work 70-hour weeks with no pay overtime. Another spoke about bribes and threats. Their stories painted a new picture, a man who had built his empire on fear. The courtroom shifted. The jury's faces softened. People began to see Liang for who he was. But Liang's team retaliated with a bombshell. They produced a video clip, grainy, taken from a security camera. It showed Amara in the diner weeks before the slap, slamming her hand on a counter during an argument with a rude customer. Liang's lawyers pounced, claiming it proved she had a violent streak. The room erupted with whispers. Amara's heart raced. She remembered that night. It wasn't anger. It was frustration after being called names she'd heard too many times. But the video didn't show words. It only showed her hand, heavy and loud against wood. Evelyn leaned close, whispering, "Don't lose faith. Context matters. We'll use it." Still, Amara sat frozen, shame crawling over her skin. She could feel the country's eyes on her again, judging, dividing, questioning. The trial had turned into more than truth versus lies. It had become a mirror of America itself. Who gets believed? Who gets broken? Who gets back up? And as court adjourned, she knew the final battle was coming. The closing arguments began. The prosecutor painted Liang as a victim of an unstable waitress. He used words like attack, rage, and dangerous. He asked the jury to punish her for daring to stand against someone respected worldwide. Then Evelyn rose. She walked slowly to the jury box, holding nothing but her voice. "This isn't about rage," she said. "It's about a man who believed money gave him the right to hurt someone who served him. And it's about what happened when that person said, "Not today." Amara didn't throw him because of anger. She threw him because he crossed the line no human being should cross. The courtroom fell silent. Evelyn leaned forward. Ask yourselves, if it were your daughter, your sister, your mother, standing where Amara stood, what would you expect her to do? Amara's eyes burned with tears. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. She felt carried by every voice outside chanting her name. But Leon wasn't done. As the jury left to deliberate, he stood and hissed at her across the room, his eyes sharp as knives. "This isn't over. Even if you win, I'll crush you." Her heart pounded, but she didn't flinch. She held his gaze until the guards pulled him back. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just a trial anymore. It was destiny. The jury filed back into the room. The foreman stood, paper in hand, eyes steady. The whole courtroom held its breath. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." The words echoed like thunder. Amara gasped, hands flying to her face. Tears blurred her vision as Evelyn squeezed her shoulder. The crowd erupted. Cheers, claps, chants rising like a wave. For the first time since that slap, Amara felt the heavy weight lift from her chest. Leon sat frozen, his perfect mask cracking. Reporters rushed outside to broadcast the verdict. His empire trembled as stock prices dropped, sponsors pulled away, and public outrage spread like wildfire. Amara walked out of that courthouse free. Outside, the crowd cheered her name, holding signs that read, "We stand with Amara." Strangers hugged her. Mothers lifted their daughters to see her. Men raised their fists in solidarity. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a symbol of survival, of dignity, of the fight for respect. Later that night, she stood in front of her grandmother's house, staring up at the stars. Lorraine's voice echoed in her heart. "Keep your spirit steady when the storm rises." The storm had risen, and she had stood. She knew the fight for justice wasn't over. Leon would still have power, still have influence, but he no longer had control over her. Amara whispered into the night, "I chose myself, and I'll keep choosing." And to everyone watching this story, remember this. Sometimes the smallest act of courage, one throw, one word, one refusal to bend, can shake the walls of power. Because courage is contagious. Because dignity is worth defending. Because silence is never the answer. If this story moved you, don't just scroll away. Hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment about the moment that hit you hardest. Share this video so someone else can find strength too. This isn't just Amara's story, it's all of ours.